Good afternoon to all of you who are watching us. I am Gabriel Sampaio. I have this task of being a moderator of this fantastic panel with two people I really admire. I will introduce you during this ED International Seminar, Professor Márcia Tiburi. She's a philosopher and writer. She's a writer, professor of philosophy, and also a visual artist. She studied at PUC Rio Grande do Sul. She studied art in Rio Grande do Sul, and she has a postdoctorate degree in art in Unicamp. She taught in the University of Paris 8 in France. It's a very synthetic version of her curriculum here. And Márcia, I really appreciate you being here. And also Denice Santiago, Lieutenant Colonel, and also the creator of the Maria da Penha Ronda in the military police of Bahia. And she's also the creator of the Maria da Penha Round. Psychologist, she's also a master's in the psychology of social management, and also she's taking a course on gender and feminism at UFBA, and she's superintendent of prevention of violence against women in the public secretary as a public secretary of security in the state of Bahia. So I am here to moderate this panel, and I will pass on the floor now to Professor Márcia. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to be here in Brasilia in this very important seminar. It's great to be here with Denice and Gabriel, and it's nice to see other familiar faces here. I will, this is my introduction now, and I think it's important to say that I am not a specialist in public security, but I am a specialist in women, and I even am one publicly. And I wanted to say that in order to explain where I'm coming from, because even though I'm not a specialist in public security, I am a person who is trying hard every day for decades to reflect on certain topics, and even the topic of security, and I almost said insecurity. You know, talking about public security is of course important, not only for society as a whole, and not only women, but also a certain reflection is necessary when we talk about that. And that goes through the bias that is so necessary for the current society. That is the bias of the feminist bias, because, and I say, well, it's a bias because this is it is a bias, you know, just like masculinism is a bias, and so far this is the narrative that has been winning, and it has been winning the territory over capitalism and patriarchy and fascism and all of those things. So I think an unavoidable question that we can pose in order to start talking today in regards to safety for women, I think that is a problem that Denice will talk more about. That is a question that we have to ask, you know, security for whom? So the statistics, the numbers that we usually use in order to analyze society are terrible when it comes to women, and be it cis women, trans women, black women, all kinds of women, and women who are victims of violence. They are always in the millions. And at the same time, when we see the growth of this problem that we can deal with as a rule, because it is an internal law of patriarchy itself, we women, we are all in a, to some extent we are already under the threat of death, and I won't go too much into that, but it is about thinking about the racist patriarchal society and the capitalist society and security for whom. So we are under threat under a certain logic. So I have to say that I have been writing about feminism and politics all of those years, and I came to the conclusion that the patriarchal society works within an equation that implies power and violence. And I wrote that about that in my most popular book called Uncommon Feminism, Feminismo em Comum. And in this equation, we see men with the monopoly of violence because they have all monopolies, and also the monopoly of violence, which sustain all of the others. So political, economic monopoly, all of the powers are in the hands of men due to the violent game that they play against women. And in order to transform that society, and this is something that we should worry about all the time, women would need to reach power. So, thinking in terms of solutions, I don't see any chance of having this patriarchal society with all of those monopolies and with violence under the service of men. I don't see men transforming the women's life towards more safety, right? So the only solution that I see is women to take power and to fight for hegemony, a feminist hegemony. So I think that is paramount. We would make our own security because the exercise of power will happen that way. It's very rare that you will see someone that is not involved with a given issue that will be able to fight for it. You have to be a very refined person, a very evolved person, very prepared emotionally and politically, socially prepared in order to deal with those necessities of a being with whom you do not identify. And in this society, capitalism has always been like that. As Max Weber said, it creates the bodies that they need to survive, and the patriarchy has always done that. So what is gender, right? The feminine gender is made to serve the masculine gender, and I apologize for my philosophy mania here. I have to quote Simone de Beauvoir saying, what is the second sex here? The second sex is very represented here. The first sex is numerous, hegemonic, and it owns everything, and the second sex is very well represented, and they like us, the owners of the first sex. But the truth is that in social terms is we are secondary, we are unessential, and we can play the role of the just making numbers, right? And we don't want to do that anymore. So I think this equation should be known and subverted. So women need to take power, because only by taking power they will be able to have power over violence against them. And I also need to say the following. Sometimes we get too abstract and we have to go there, because power for men is always a narcissistic power in nature. Men exert power through narcissism and also privilege. However, the patriarchal culture is also turned towards the principle of death, so there is an enjoyment of death, and it's not the case here, but it's not important to go too much into that topic right now. But from Freud to Elias Canetti, going through many other authors, many people have realized the link between capitalism and also the the impulse for death, and this is something that the patriarchy always pursues. So erotic from eros, these are the women and their activity that is under a subjectivity matrix that is part of the division of labor, but it's more beautiful and more pleasant and better to have a system of care, which is what creates this subjectification of women. It is not in our nature. This is not a subject that we are going to deal with today. We are dealing with culture here, and we are programmed for care, and sometimes we forget to take care of our own selves, and if we know that if we don't take care of ourselves, nobody will. And this is a very important topic. I wanted to say that quickly before we start, but allow me to come up with one more idea here. I came here convinced that I have to mention what I call decorative violence. And I believe it is fundamental to mention when we see Brazil, at least after the coup of 2016. And yesterday we had one of the main shows of this in the National Congress in the House of Representatives. It was a horror show, and a female representative, Heloísa Erundina, a great woman, a great public figure, has been taken to the hospital. She was in urgent need of care, and she is still under the intensive care unit. She couldn't bear the violence coming from the extreme right-wing representatives. So everybody who watched let's talk about the 6 women who were there, who were victims of that attempt of a coup. I won't mention any names. Let's not go there, but I don't need to say any ugly names such as Arthur Lira. This is not our objective here today. Let's analyze the thesis here. The screams, the offenses, the bad words, the perverse abuse. A day before, a representative that had her brother killed in Rio, Samuel Bonfim, has been offended, and they used her brother's killing against her in a classic moment of narcissistic abuse cycle. Bolsonaro has a whole cycle of narcissistic abuse cycle against Brazil. I have been writing about this for many years now, and we talk about the ridiculous, the political ridiculous, and it is all about this, this this capitalization of the grotesque discourse. So you can imagine all of those representatives are not qualified, but Michel Foucault would say that, right? Dequalification will produce an effect of power. So elegance doesn't. You see, now we have today Ronaldo Caiado, if you watch that. He comes in, he's a tall man, well dressed, a doctor. And it's interesting to see, he has hair. No judgment really, but it's curious to see. He would be a regular citizen, right? But when he starts to speak along the lines of control of the pater potestas, which is a kernel of the environment, he will be very successful. On the one hand, he would incite fear, and on the other, he would incite terror. So some won't agree with him if they still live under democracy in their minds, but others will associate to him out of panic, out of fear. So you have those two instances of fear. One that will make you dialogue with this subject, and criticize him, and the other one will be just panic. And then you associate to it and you say yes to everything as if you have been sent a message to mimetize with the threat. And then you say, well, look, you don't need to attack me because I'm on your side. I'm just like you. And this is something that always happened with the authoritarian speeches, always. Bolsonaro, and I wrote that in 500 different places, in books and articles. I always say that because I think it is important for people to know that Bolsonaro became a candidate in 2016 at the House. That's where he became a candidate, right? He was the most abject of all. He was the most grotesque and the worst of all. So that's why he managed to become the aggressor and produced an identification with people. The identification with the aggressor. This is something that psychology has been studying for a long time. The submission to the authoritarian leader. But the fact is that this works. This works, and society is being led by that. And all of this beautiful seminar here for 2 days, very well prepared with the specialists from all around the globe. This seminar here necessarily makes us think about those issues, because if you keep the system as it is, with the possibilities for violence that we have right now, which is the white man, the capitalist white man that we have here, this is easily transformed into fascism. And if you don't change that, nothing will change. I don't ever forget Vilma Reis, a feminist from Bahia. I'll finish. She started talking about the photography of power, and I think that is one of the most important things. We have to know that this decorative violence, the man that shows the screaming, tries to capitalize on the psycho power that destroys others and puts fear as a tool to make the potential victim to believe that they are part of the game. So we start to understand the black who is a racist, or the woman who is a chauvinist, or a person with disability that is capacitist, or the poor right winger, which is a person that has been brainwashed by capitalism. But it's always a sadomasochistic game that is happening there. So society sustains itself on those terms, and I would always question that. And in order to transform the scene, we won't work with palliative care. Just to start the conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Márcia. And I will pass on the floor now to Denice Santiago. Thank you for your presence here, Denice. Good afternoon. Well, talking after Márcia is really hard. I'm a fan and a reader, and it empowers me at the same time that it makes me emotional, because if I'm here right next to her, it's because everything that she has done so far has empowered me to come here and talk. So thank you for existing and for resisting. Gabriel, thank you so much to you as well. I was reading the topic of this panel, public security and women. That made me think, well, those two topics sometimes are incongruent considering everything that we have been seeing. I'm a pioneer in the police of the state of Bahia. I'm proud. First, because I was in the first class of the military police in Bahia. I entered the task force in 1990. And also, I have a daughter, so that's my second pride. So we have a problem that we have to deal with pain and all of the adversities that the patriarchy brings us. But this is also a gift because we have to face all of that and all of the problems of patriarchy, the patriarchy, you know, and it's also a gift to be able to do that. And in the police, they have been only with men for more than 160 years, and by the end of the year of 2020, now we have a bunch of women now, and we were only corporals, right? So we joined as corporals, and I've been there for now for 34 years, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And I said some people would say, God forbid one day a woman would be in command of the military police, right? And that, you know, makes us move forward. And the power of women in at the task force and the police, that historically was just a masculine space because people think that power equals strength equals men, right? So if the military police is a space for strength and power, it is of course a masculine space. And that's actually not the case because the police has the function of preventing violence. That is the job we do. So we have the constitutional function of preventing violence ostensibly. And to prevent is to take care and to educate and protect and anticipate and idealize. And what is the gender that we're talking about when you use those words? Masculine or feminine? So for me, the police is much more feminine than masculine. And we are in a corporation that, you know, even our ranks cannot be on the feminine. When I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, I would say lieutenant colonel in the feminine, which is possible in Portuguese. And people would ask, well, why do you say that? That doesn't exist. And I said, well, it doesn't exist because back when you invented that, they wouldn't even imagine that a woman could wear a uniform. And now we have women in uniform, and now I am a lieutenant colonel female. I am a captain in the female, right? So coming back to the title of this panel, you know, public safety and women, this is a huge event, a well-organized event. And the first three panels this morning, we had no women there talking about public security. None of them. And now we have this room with the topic of public security and women, and most of us are female. So how can we think about that? How can we think that those corporations that have spent most of their time only with men, how can they see or understand the violence against women? How can that corporation, and I agree with you, there is a necro policy of feminism since we are born. Whenever they look at us and say, oh, it's a woman, oh, what now? A lot of work. What about when they menstruate? What about if they get pregnant? What if they get raped? What if? We are born with so many problems in our bodies that being born a woman now still, unfortunately, is a proof of courage. You know, I think in heaven you make an agreement and say, hey, okay, you're going to reincarnate. Can I go and be a man? No. Can I? And people say, hey, can I be born in Bahia? And I'm carrying out some research, and I said it's about being violated and authoritated, right? So I'm talking about domestic violence. So in this research, when I questioned everybody, I was asking women if they have felt or gone through any kind of violence, and most of them, first, they would acknowledge that they have been violated, and some of them will say they have never been through that or harassment, and some of them will speak directly about violence, domestic violence, and we don't talk about it often because sometimes when we report that as a police officer representing an institution that is more than 100 years old, dealing with violence, I am being violated as well. So we won't report, right? The military police will not report. So what can we do with this corporation that doesn't even realize that their own members are suffering from violence, and in some dimension the corporation itself is also violating the women within its own corporation, right? So during the 90s, I went to take an examination, to make an examination in the doctor's office, and we had to stand naked in front of all men. And that is in 89, right? I had to take a test to see if I was pregnant or not, and I had to piss with everybody looking at me, with no doors in the bathroom. So that is how everything goes, right? When you have the police, you don't have a bathroom for the ladies. 34 years later, right? So how can a constitution that doesn't take care of women, that doesn't even take into consideration of the feminine, and when I'm talking about the feminine in the biological sense, how can an entity that does not consider that in their own professional relationship, now in Bahia we have 6 lieutenant colonels that are women, up to until last week we had 3 only, comparing to 200 and some males, right? And you can say, well, you've been here for 34 years only, and but out of those women, only one would command a unity for protection for women. So she was leading. Does that corporation take action against violence that their own women are suffering? And when we face domestic violence and you have a victim there, and the officer says, hey, you're sure you want to report again? He's the father of your kids. How can we deal with those specificities of this gender? How how does the institution deal with that? How can they think about public security like that? If we see from all of those 27 states in Brazil, we have one secretary for one female secretary for public security, and the response of the government would say, well, this is most charming one. And I was thinking, hey, isn't it the most competent that you meant to say? And they were saying not the most competent or the best or the best trained, but no, the most charming. And they can't even deal with women in power because the woman is not even accepted by the public security apparatus, right? So I want to hear from you as well. So I'm almost finished. So I think we have to bring those two significance, public security and women. We have to have more women in the positions of power. And I always tell the governor that I'm willing and able, right? Let's have more women thinking in a different way. The Maria da Penha round, even though it is a market preserve, it has been incorporated into the state of Bahia because we had a woman commanding a troop that would protect women. And they would understand that what they were going through because they were women, right? So how can we deal with a police force, be it a civilian police or a military police, when it is not able to understand the need of women, of the females, and all of those issues entailed by being a woman that we still have. So we hope we will have more women in positions of power, public security that will understand that it is not about strength, it is about protection and care, and for us to understand by the end of it, to we have to understand at least that in the next edition of this seminar we will have more women opening the seminar and talking, so that we can hear more feminine voices here, and for us to have the possibility of having more women in as directors of department, for instance. And I had a woman working with me, and she was a director, and she put director in her door, written on the door in the masculine, right? And she said, well, it doesn't really matter, right? And I said, well, it does matter, because I want the little kid to come here and say, well, I can do that as well. So I am on the side of this woman, right? I want this black little kid that came from public schools, that have been taking buses to go here and there. I want them to be able to get into positions of power and say, hey, I can do that too. I think we have a very well addressed question here for you. Denice, thank you very much for your time. So I think we have a man here, right? So there is a question here that is addressed to us men, and I am working as a lawyer for human rights, and I have a work that I carry out closely related to the mothers that lose their children to violence, right? And there's a very strong phrase that has been said by Deborah, which is about giving birth to a new Brazil, because we have a whole criticism that we have heard before, Marcia, and I'm talking to you in the first name without the liturgy of professor or lieutenant colonel for Benice, but everything that is addressed here, and Deborah is saying that as everything that society reproduces in terms of violence, it reproduces in her life and in the murder of her son, and not giving answers to all of that violence, right? In addition to all of the violence that we have been living with since the beginning, since its conception, still we have the violence of the loss of a son, the lack of responses or the lack of assistance and so on. And these mothers are facing to this direction of especially after the Constitution in '88, we have to consider that people need to learn and re-signify what they do and the way in which they deal with institutional violence. So, Denise, we think about that as institutional violence as a structural process, but it also points to this side of the women that see themselves with the task of sustaining and having to lead that response that also damages the society, and also black men and young black and black youth, and that needs reparation. So So let's say none of us will question, at least in principle, the necropolicy of the patriarchy as a system that is producing necropolicy, thanatopolitics, and biopolitics, and all of those, and psychological policies, and all of those categories. So the society and the world as a whole, this organized system that is codified, doesn't even remember women exist, and the issue of safety is a heavy one for them because they are all under the death sentence. And today I heard, I don't know who said that, but anyway, I don't remember who was the person saying that, but somebody said that insecurity is the big category now in Brazil. And I say, well, okay, insecurity, but is that food insecurity? Is it violence or environmental or all of them? Women live under all of those, and I would even use another category here that I think anthropologically makes sense for us to think about that politically as well, which is the category of threat. So we have a threat. We have a constant cultural threat against our bodies, right? The girl that is born, it's always a problem, when a girl is born, and this is always a result of the devaluing of women, because the value, when we think about that under Marxist theory, value is men, especially white men. And when you mention that situation of the mothers of those kids who were killed, we also share that with the young black, the position of potential victims. We are all situated under that threat that is strategic for the patriarchy. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how can we think about security under those signs, and how to deal with that? We don't even exist in this territory. So our panel here is completely strange, right? So we are already counting. So if we can take advantage of that, and if we can produce feminist consciousness here, we are able to finally exist and take advantage of the situation. This is a history stage that we have to overcome, and let's reach feminist hegemony, let's say, or eco-social feminist hegemony, as I usually say. And I think the way can be built intersectionally, with more agents, with a more open discussion. And I started saying I'm not a specialist, but why not listening to people who are not specialists to a discussion that is able to positively alter the public scenario? I have been more and more involved with subjects that I'm not familiar with out of solidarity, and I try to collaborate with the legislation for revocation of parental alienation. I never had the problem, of having going through that, but I give voice to some women because they are fighting for that. So I think that is fundamental. And in addition to all that I said, if we have time, I wanted to speak about the feminist resistance against feminicide. So this is also a subject that, well, since the system is made to kill us, we have to be together against that. Well, we have a possibility of having questions and answers here from the audience. Thank you. Well, as you said, you're not a specialist. I also took the freedom to intervene here. I had a professor in sociology in the University of Brasilia who is Denice Bento, and she talks about the theory of necrobiopower. And I think it would add a lot to this debate. I'm going to quote her book. She says, well, I would like to call this set of techniques to promote life and death from attributes that qualify and distribute the bodies on a hierarchy and takes from them the possibility of being acknowledged as humans. So they need to be eliminated and others should leave. When we speak about the necrobiopower, we can talk a lot about letting die and letting live, right? In the institutional sense. So when you say, well, you didn't have a bathroom, that reminds me that they had the latest bathroom in the House of Representatives was built in 2015, and it's also about the impossibility of women reaching places of power and not allowing this body to reach status, and with it a set of behaviors that might be analyzed sociologically. And the more segments you add, so a black woman, a fat black woman, or a lesbian fat black woman, the more you get removed from institutional areas and objectives. And letting die, when I mention that, it's denying the quota, denying the opportunity, and to say that the person is charming instead of saying they're competent, and to use adjectives that would be masculine. So when you mentioned biopower and necropolitics, that is everything I could think of, Berenice Bento talking about the institutions and the letting die, not only the physical body. Thank you for everything that you said. It is wonderful to hear, and I would like to ask two questions just to provoke you. First, it is interesting to mention that we have, the panel is called Public Security and Women, and that doesn't exist. We have no budget, we have no public security within the institutional bodies, the public entities, or even a modern startup would say that they have that, but they will show it only takes an internal auditing to show that it doesn't exist. So it doesn't exist in budget or in the public debate, and we can see here that it is incipient, even though it is so cruel and real. So the connection that I can think of about that, and I would like you to correct me if I'm wrong, if we have a man within an institution and the relationship is an affectious relationship, it is not a woman anymore. It's a mother, a wife, a daughter, a granddaughter, a niece. And if you see the relationship that you have from the man to the family members, it's different. So women becomes a category of the rest. It's about disconsideration, right? So I either have a blood relationship of the person with the person that I can use to exist and to say, hey, this is my wife, right? Let's protect her. And I'll try to consider her as a human. If it's not in this category, in this category, they would be categorized as just a woman, and that's it. And it is a generic category for a human that we call man. Everything is woman, them. In the end, woman will be just the rest. And I think that is the challenge, how to bring the qualifiers into the debate for the woman and their genders. And there are many possibilities. with not many fractions of it, as you said. Well, a black woman, a fat black woman, or a lame black fat woman with or without a child, lesbian or not, and we don't ever ask that about the men, right? So if they're black, if they're fat, or anything like that, it's just a being there living their life. So the impression I have is that by the end of it, the treatment that we give as society is that women are just the rest, unless they have a familial relationship to the man that is in power to discourse. And this would be the relationship that we see nowadays, regardless of religion and the advancements that we have and all of that. So this is a place of security for women if they are dependent on men that have the religion extract and the religious space to operate in order to protect these women and also to provide them with security. Those are just some comments that I would like to make. First of all, it's such a joy to hear you speak. The first time I heard you was in the Public Security Forum a couple of years back. So whenever I hear your name, I come to listen to you. So it's always great to hear you. Same goes to you, Marcia. And also, I just got to know Gabriel. So thank you very much. So one thing that always surprised me is how can we overcome the gift and the disgrace, as you said, right? Which is being the protagonist of change. So the question is, how has it been to you to think about the best strategies for us to overcome this place of trying to manage that space and trying to overcome all of those difficulties individually, at least so far in the fields that we work on. Unfortunately, I think that is the reality, at least in the Western world, that women are advancing at a very deep personal cost, not as a collective movement to advance. How do you see that? How do you think of those strategies? And be the strategies in theory or in practice, whatever that is, how can we advance collectively and not only individually? I was listening to you speak, and in my dissertation, I mentioned and I quote Denice Mais, the professor Denice Mais, and back in the day when I was writing it, we welcomed a group of people who were cheering for the team of Bahia in the state of Bahia, and they were being sponsors, and they were expelled from the stadium. So the man would grab them and grope them and say that they were just cheering, but say, hey, this is no place for you. Don't come in here because this place belongs to us. Don't say you are the female cheerleaders or whatever it is that you want to say. And then we had to bring police there to allow women to go watch the game. And the women started watching the game right next to the police. And that was the size of the problem. We had to have officers go with them to the bathroom so that they wouldn't be molested. So this is something that we have to think of, and the lack of acknowledgement of a person due to being a woman, things that you wouldn't do to a major or to a commander as a woman 4 years ago, people would ask me, "Hey, you're here? You are finding your place here. And who's taking care of your child? Who's taking care of your husband?" And I said, "Well, why don't you ask the other candidates about that? Because this for me, you will see. Well, in the military police of the state of Bahia, I had this experience of a colonel saying, "Hey, you don't want to command." And I said, "Well, you mean we don't want, or you mean I don't want to be working 24/7? And you mean to say I have to travel and I have to leave my husband at home? And what is your husband going to think about you, and all of that?" And again, saying that this is no place for you. Don't come in here. So we live with that a lot, and we go through that perspective of people trying to push us out, and we end up accepting it. And I will agree with you by quoting Vilma Reis, which is somebody that I have a great admiration for, when she speaks about the accumulated violence. Even though we don't need that, we don't need to explain, as I had to 4 years ago, why I was a woman and I was trying to get in there. I had to explain that I am a black woman coming from the outskirts and all of that. Each one of those people will suffer violence in a different way. So for my brother, who's a black, poor man, getting sick was way easier. He's down there in the pyramid because he's black, right? But he's already way ahead of me. And for me to get where he is, and people say, "Hey, you don't need to say you're black. We can see that." And I don't say I'm black because people don't see me. I'm saying I'm black because you need to understand that I'm black, and I want to be perceived as that. And from those experiences, there's a funny one. And well, a lieutenant colonel said to me, "Hey, Denice, when I am the general commander, my proposal is uh, to bring you girls out of the police because you're not worth anything. You get pregnant, you have kids, you have to have a license, you don't come to work, you're useless. I don't want female officers here. I will have only gay men here." And then, he said that once, twice, and then we had a carnival in Salvador, and we have about 30 people there, and he said, "Hey, Denise, come here." And I said, "Hey, Colonel, do you want to also fuck all of the gay men that you will bring here?" And then he stopped and looked at me, and he took a deep breath and said nothing. And he never said those words again. And a colleague said, "Hey, are you crazy to say that?" And I said, "Well, if I don't put any limits to that, if I don't say that, if I don't say, if I don't make it clear why I'm here, I won't get anywhere. Because when a woman is killed, all of the others are killed a little bit as well. A piece of us goes. When a woman suffers domestic violence and we don't do anything, we say, well, you can do that, nobody cares, nobody gives a damn." So when a woman is put aside, and we even think of a culture, a reflection, a conditioning that we have, a perverse conditioning, saying, "Well, what was she doing here? Oh, come on, a girl in a carnival, drunk, full of men around. Who said that was safe?" As if the guilt was hers, for being violated. So if we don't think of that, you said Luciana, right? Yeah, Luciana, if we don't do that together, if we don't resist together, if we don't work together in promoting our own selves, we are women who look to the side in a very competitive way, and we make ourselves sick with that. It's not like, well, it should be a woman there, it should be that woman, which is me. But when we have a woman out there shining they're not shining, and they're also shining. They're not outshining anybody. They're shining together. On the 17th of April in 2016, that was my birthday, and one of the saddest birthdays I ever had. And people were not taking one woman from power; they were taking all of us from power. That was for everybody. And if we applaud that and say, "Oh, she was wrong," we're saying to all of us, to society in general, well, that's it. You can do that, and that's no place for a woman. They have no bathroom there. They don't have a space there. Don't even try, because remember the last one. So if we don't do that together, if we don't understand that we have to do this jointly and together, we have to stop with this divide and conquer policy that we have been through for many years now. If we don't work together and if we don't resist to that, there is no way around it. We won't be able to do anything else after that. It's no time to be equal. We have to be different. Because we need resources, we need public policies, we need dialogue, and we need to build those solutions with whoever is a specialist. And if you say, well, you're a specialist because you feel that, you go through that, you live that. Only I know what it is to be me, to be a black woman in uniform. So I know how it is to get into a store and people follow me. You don't know how it goes, right? You don't know what I feel. So we women know what it is to go into a garage to get our cars by ourselves. Those North American movies saying, well, you cannot go for a jog in Central Park, otherwise you get raped and killed. And when you go to the bus stop by yourself, well, this was an amazing thing that happened when we had before Christmas Eve from 2020 to 2021. Something magical happened. We had many murders of women, and I said, well, we need to talk to Kevin. That meme about we need to talk to Kevin. I said, well, we need to talk about feminism. Said, well, now we need to do that, right? And in the following day, we came up with a meeting, and 3 days later we were 3 people. 15 days after that we were 80 people, and then it grew and grew. And in March 2021 we started in a very organized way. We started this campaign, and the campaign is still ongoing. It is a campaign, right? So it is on advocacy and publicity and screaming and reporting and everything that we can do in order to make people realize that there is a slaughtering of women in Brazil. It is the necro policy, necrobio-policy, biopolicy, thanato policy, and it is a massacre of women. And this is with the finesse, right? People will invade homes and take down the walls, and people would, kill people in jail and then throw them out the window. Because it's not enough to just kill. We have to have the symbol as well. You have to also have the issue of, in addition to the physical aggression, you also have the symbolic aggression of the slaughtering, and also the production of this imagination that will foster more and more deaths. And this campaign was gigantic, and people who were part of it also got impressed. So the different female politicians in all levels started to engage. This was on the 25th of March, and that became the National Day against feminicide in Brazil. And that is impressive because that got women that didn't know each other together. Brazil is many countries at the same time. So people are in the southeastern region, and you got to know people, women from the Amazon and women from Acre and Rondônia, and places where you had never been. And so all of these women got together, and they are still doing that. Myself and Vilma created that story, and we kickstarted that, and the ball started rolling, and everybody is participating. But we became a decorative figure in the end, and it's funny to see that because it is one aspect of the strength and the courage and the organization and the proactivity that women have. So they do everything with nothing. They do that with the time they have left. So the entities that are associated are more than 100. We have now more than 1,000 entities associated. So most of them will have a way to deal with their identities, bringing them into the project and also producing events linked to this campaign. So I wanted to say that, and I think the way out is to be intersectional, meaning we have to get together and we have to produce what I call the dialogical feminism, which is not about theory. You can have your own references, your own theories, your own studies, your own visions and texts and whatever you like. But everybody should be working towards the same goal of dismantling the patriarchy. So this is the only way if we want to survive this in this planet, considering this awareness of this threat that is above everybody here and above life on Earth. If you want to discuss decolonial feminism, it is important to understand that the persecution against witches in Europe that has been transformed into persecution towards women here in the Americas, people who are also called black, they have been subjugated and made slaves out of them, and that's how we move on. So our feminism now is against the lesbo side and also feminine side and trans feminine side, and we work with this idea that we are all under threat regardless of our biological origins as women. Of course, giving space to a visibility that is above any sexual aspects and also any racial aspects, without which we are not going to advance anywhere. That would be it. Thank you. We don't have any more time now, so I really apologize because the time won't make it possible for us to. We don't have time for any more Q&A, but thank you very much, Denice and Márcia. Have a great afternoon, everybody.